Have you ever thought about what really holds a diverse country together? I mean, how do people with totally different languages and cultures all manage to live peacefully under one flag? Sometimes it works out, but other times, those very differences can tear a nation apart. Today, we're going to dig into that exact problem by looking at the story of two countries that stood right at that crossroads.
So, here's the big question. When a country is deeply divided, what happens? To get to the bottom of that, we're going to dive into the stories of Belgium and Sri Lanka. They're two nations that face this very challenge, and, well, they took dramatically different paths.
All right, let's get into our tale of two countries. To really understand the choices they made, we first got to understand what they looked like on the inside. Who lives there, and what were the tensions simmering just below the surface.
Okay, first up, Belgium. Now you look at the numbers, and you see a clear majority of Dutch speakers, about 59%. But the real story here, it's all about power. For a long time, the minority French-speaking community, at 40%, was actually richer and way more influential. And that imbalance, well, it created some serious tension that really started to boil over in the 1950s and 60s.
Now let's hop over to Sri Lanka, an island nation just south of India. Here, the situation was a bit different. After it got its independence in 1948, the demographics were pretty straightforward. A big Sinhala-speaking majority at 74% and a pretty significant Tamil-speaking minority at 18%. And this one fact would set the stage for a completely different kind of story.
So how did Belgium deal with its deep divisions? Instead of letting the whole country just split apart, its leaders chose a really unique path. They chose the path of accommodation. It was a conscious, deliberate choice to work together to keep their country in one piece. And the solution they came up with, what's now known as the Belgian model, is it's complicated, but it's also incredibly clever. First, they made a rule: an equal number of Dutch and French-speaking ministers in the central government, no exceptions. Important laws needed a dual majority. That means they had to get support from both language groups. Power was also pushed down to state governments. The capital, Brussels, got its own government with equal representation, and they even created something called a community government, just to handle cultural and language stuff.
And what it all boiled down to was this one simple idea. The Belgian leaders realized that the only way the country could stay united was if they respected the feelings and interests of all the different communities. This idea of mutual respect, that became the foundation of their solution. And it worked. It stopped a potential civil war in its tracks.
Now, get ready for a sharp turn. While Belgium was busy building bridges, Sri Lanka, after its independence, went down the complete opposite path, a path defined not by accommodation, but by the domination of the majority.
This approach actually has a name: majoritarianism. It's the idea that if your group is in the majority, you should be able to run the country however you want, without even thinking about what the minority groups want or need. And this belief became the guiding principle for the new government in Sri Lanka.
And the results? They were absolutely devastating. The Sinhala community used their majority to completely dominate the government. They passed policies that favored Sinhala speakers for good jobs and spots in universities. The Tamil language and culture were basically pushed aside. All of this led to a growing sense of alienation among the Tamils, which tragically spiraled into a civil war that lasted for decades.
I mean, the contrast here just couldn't be any clearer. Belgium chose accommodation, respecting everyone's differences, and the result was national unity. Sri Lanka chose majoritarianism, forcing the majority's will on everyone, and the result was a brutal civil war. Two democracies, two totally different choices, and two vastly different outcomes.
Okay, so looking at these two stories, it really makes you wonder, right? We can see that sharing power is a huge deal. But why? What are the fundamental reasons that make it so important for a democracy?
Well, you can think about it in two main ways. First, there are what we call prudential or practical reasons. Basically, sharing power is just smart. It lowers the chances of conflict, it makes the country more stable, and it helps avoid that tyranny of the majority we saw in Sri Lanka. But then there are moral reasons. These say that power sharing is good in and of itself. It's the very soul of democracy because people have a right to have a say in how they're governed. And this is absolutely crucial. Power sharing isn't just some clever political trick to keep people from fighting.
It's a core democratic value. It makes sure that all citizens, by being able to participate, feel like they have a real stake in their own government.
Okay, so we get why it's so important to share power. But how do modern democracies actually do it? Let's take a look at the different tools they use.
The two most common ways are what we call horizontal and vertical sharing. Think of it like this. Horizontal sharing happens sideways, between different parts of the government that are on the same level, like the legislature that makes laws, the executive that carries them out, and the judiciary that interprets them. Vertical sharing happens up and down, between different levels of government, like the central government, state governments, and local city councils.
So that horizontal power sharing, it works because of a really famous system called checks and balances. Each branch of government has its own specific powers, but it can also check or limit the powers of the other two. This whole setup makes sure that no single part of the government can get too powerful and run away with everything.
And that vertical power sharing, we usually call that federalism. That's a system where the Constitution officially divides power between a central government and various regional or state governments. And this should sound really familiar, because this is exactly what Belgium did to solve its problems. It changed itself from a single central system into a federal one.
But wait, there's more. Power can also be shared among different social groups. Remember Belgium's brilliant community government? That's a perfect example. And it can be shared among political parties. Think about it. When no single party wins an election outright, they have to form alliances, or coalition governments. That forces them to share power and work together.
So if you remember just one thing from all this, let it be this. The old way of thinking, that all power has to be in the hands of one person or one group, is over. The basic idea of a modern democracy is that political power comes from the people, and it should be spread out among as many citizens as possible.
And that brings us to one last thought to chew on. This whole idea of sharing power, it's not just for big countries and governments. Think about your own life. How is power shared, or maybe not shared, in your school, in your neighborhood, or even inside your own family? It's a concept that truly shapes our world on every single level.